Hello there everybody, and thanks for tuning in to another video here on Armor of God. Before I get on with this video, I would like to say thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video, and my sincerest apology in advance that it's going to be a bit long. But I think you'll learn something new by the end of this video if you are willing to watch until the end. Anyway, let's get on with it then. Then Yahweh God said to the snake, "Because you have done this, accursed be you of all animals wild and tame. On your belly you will go, and on dust you will feed as long as you live." Genesis, chapter 3, verse 14. In one of Father Chad Ripperger's lectures, he explained what this punishment means for the devil and how we become the instrument of their humiliation. As usual, I start off with the introduction. According to Father Ripperger, God allows demons in our lives, not so much that he wants them, but he allows them in our lives in order so that we can grow in virtue. We become the instrument of their humiliation, and we become the instrument of their justice. When Adam ate the fruit and Eve ate the fruit, God said to the serpent, which is another name for Satan, God said to him, "Because you have done this, you will crawl on the ground all the days of your life and eat dust." And the crawling on the ground means this, that Satan will be constantly humiliated.
Beelzebub, which is another name for Satan, actually admitted to me once that God the Father actually goes out of his way to set him up to get humiliated. Why? Because it's his just punishment, because his sin was pride. So he actually goes out of his way to humiliate them. The second thing is, he's going to crawl on the ground all the days of his life and eat dust. And then the fathers of the church ask them, "What's this dust?" And then they simply make the reply, "Memento homo quia pulvis es," which is the Latin for "Remember, man, that thou art dust." What that means is that the demons are now stuck with us. They hate us. They don't want anything to do with us, but now they are stuck with us. And essentially, because Satan caused our fall, he is now stuck dealing with us, tempting us, doing those things, which, by the way, it's true he gets a sadistic delight out of seeing us fall and us to see commit sin. But he has also admitted to me that one of the things that happens is every time he gets someone to fall, there is an increase in his shame. So that in point and fact, every time he gets us to fall, his suffering increases. And this is part of God's punishment, and we become the instrument of his punishment, instrument of justice by denying him and by combating him.
I'm sure if you've listened to these exorcists a lot, you will notice that they speak a lot about our Blessed Mother, and for non-Catholics, they will definitely find it difficult to understand. Why do these exorcists keep bringing up about the Blessed Virgin Mary, and what is the role of the intercession of Mary in exorcisms? Well, please allow me to share what these exorcists have been saying about our Blessed Mother. She is seen as a very powerful ally for anyone who's up against the forces of evil, and the main reason for this is because of obedience. As we know, obedience is what destroys the devil because he wants the human person to rebel against God as he did. We know that the serpent in the Garden of Eden convinced Adam and Eve to be disobedient to God. And when Mary says yes to God's plan, when the angel Gabriel comes and says, "God has a plan," Mary responds by saying, "Let it be done to me according to your word." So we can say that her yes to God reverses the no of Adam and Eve from the garden, and again, is because of her obedience to the divine will that the devil is destroyed. And that's really the role of the saints as well. We can say that the saints are people who have become so gripped by the love of God that they see on the cross that everything that they do now is uniting their will to God's will, which ultimately is the goal of every Christian.
Once, the demon looked at me and in relationship to Our Lady, he said, "Her power is in her humility." Now think about what that means. That means this. It means that when we are proud, we're weak. Why are we weak? Because we take control. Whereas when we're humble, we let Christ operate through us, and he has infinite power. He's omnipotent, and therefore can accomplish anything. And so it's through the humility. It's her humility that made Our Lady so powerful in the end. It's even her humility now that makes her that perfect instrument of her Son. The perfect instrument. The perfect instrument is the one the instrument does, or the tool does exactly what you want it to do when you want it to do it. And that's what Our Lady was, and still is. She always does God's will whenever and in the manner that He so determines, and puts herself aside and never, ever counted the personal cost. Ever. So, humility. You have to work on humility. It's a grace. It has to come, and you have to ask Our Lady for it.
Even Father Vincent Lampert once said during an interview that demons can find it very difficult to say certain prayers. He did an exorcism once, and during the exorcism he commanded the demon to say Hail Mary, full of grace, the greeting of the Archangel Gabriel to the Blessed Mother. And you know what happened next? Let's hear from Father Lampert himself.
And the demon laughed and scrambled the words and said, Grace of full. Wouldn't say the name of our Blessed Mother, again recognizing she's a very powerful ally. But then I commanded the demon to obey me in all things, although an unworthy minister of Christ, and then to say the words in the manner that I told it to say it, and then to depart immediately. So again, certain prayers are very powerful because the demon is forced to say a component of our faith that it has rejected. And one could say that in an exorcism, the church is throwing into the face of the demons the very things which they have rejected, which caused their downfall.
The following clip is rather interesting because I've watched the movie The Exorcism of Emily Rose many times before, and so when Father Ripperger talked about it, naturally I listened intently on what he has to say about it. And even more because Father Ripperger is an exorcist, so to hear an actual exorcist speaking about a movie that's related to exorcism makes it even more interesting. But before that, Father Ripperger did say that in the movies, when you go to the movies and the exorcists in these movies, which he can hardly sit through, the movies tend to show these exorcists as afraid, somewhat incapable, and the demons are always too much for the exorcists to handle. But the reality is the exact opposite.
When an experienced exorcist steps into the room with with a demon, the demon is scared to death. And the reason he's scared to death is because there's a 500-pound gorilla standing behind the priest, and that gorilla's name is Christ, who's about to beat him so badly that he will get to the point where his threshold of pain is so bad he will simply shut down and can't function. He knows that's what's coming. He knows it's going to go badly. He knows he's going to get humiliated. He knows he's going to have to do and say things that when he gets back in hell, he's going to get ridiculed over. He knows all that, so he's scared to death. But that should give us the courage to recognize that when it comes to our own spiritual battles, Christ is standing behind us as long as we are standing with Him.
Anyway, back to what Father Ripperger said about the exorcism of Emily Rose. To begin with, as we know, the movie Emily Rose is based on a true story, the story of Annelise Michelle, and unlike the movie, which didn't get it right, she was possessed twice. First in 1967, and then she was liberated around 1979. And then, as we all saw in the movie and also happened in real life, Our Lady appeared to her and said, "Would you allow the possession again so that many would come to knowledge of it?" Annelise Michelle said yes, and she became possessed again. Eventually, Annelise Michelle ended up dying from it because the demons shut down her ability to eat, and according to Father Ripperger, demons can do this, God permitting.
But during her periods of lucidity, she would spend hours in front of the Blessed Sacrament making reparation and praying for the clergy in Germany, because at the time, this was from 1970 roughly until 1972, the German priests were going off the rails at that time. She offered up her possession, all the pain and the suffering that she went through, because when demons manifest, sometimes a person just blacks out, but sometimes the person feels every single thing that the demon is feeling or going through or experiencing, and so it's literally like going through a torture session. That's one of the reasons why it's hard to keep them on focus or on track. But she offered all of that up for the clergy at the time. Christ actually told her, according to the memoirs, Christ actually told her that she would eventually be raised to the altar, which is another way of being said she would be canonized. She was an extraordinarily holy woman, which tells you something. You can be possessed, and it doesn't say anything about whether you're in the state of grace or not, because possession's in the body, sanctity or holiness, that is, the sanctifying grace, is in the soul. They're in two different locations.
To continue with the theme of this video, which is really about the role of the intercession of the Blessed Virgin in exorcisms, there's something that Father Carlos Martins said about our Blessed Mother which I'd like to share with you here. But up to this point, I think you will find in the clips I've shared with you so far from Father Ripperger and Father Lampert, they talked a lot about the importance of humility and being obedient. According to Father Carlos Martins, the devil absolutely despises the Blessed Virgin. And why is it so? Why does the devil despises her so much? Well, that is because the Blessed Mother was faithful where he was faithless, and she obeyed where he rebelled, and she resisted every temptation that he leveled at her, and she chose to remain faithful to the Lord.
And from her came the new Adam, the fruit of fruits from the tree of life, who has set us free. And so Our Lady is the material cause, if you will, of our redemption, because she provided the human body of our Savior. Her yes has provided the redemption of mankind. And so the devil despises her. Every single yes that she gave to the Lord, every single act of faithfulness and obedience was the beginning of his downfall. And when the Lord came into the world through his incarnation, then through his birth and his ministry and so forth, what we have here is now God's plan being executed. All of that is due, of course, to God the Father. It was his plan, but it was through the cooperation of this creature, of this simple Israelite girl, this woman who became the mother of God. And there is a vehement anger and visceral hatred that he has towards her. And I will say this, I mean, to give people a little bit on the inside of what may happen at the conclusion of an exorcism. When the exorcist determines, all right, we've done enough today. Now, exorcisms typically require multiple sessions in order to be done. And in fact, the average exorcism, and this is, this is my experience and the experience of the vast majority of my colleagues with whom I've asked and spoken with, the average case of possession requires somewhere around 75 exorcisms. Wow. 75. Wow. But to close an exorcism, right? Of course, in an exorcism, the demon is manifesting, or demons. Yeah. When one is cast out, there are often others. But at a certain point, you need to end the session. And you can't send a victim out who is manifesting, right? You can't send a victim out while the demon is inhabiting this person. It wouldn't be safe for the individual.
Sure.
So what we do to close off a session and ensure the cooperation of the demon, that he rescinds back to wherever place he is, we typically sing a Marian hymn, the Salve Regina, the Alma Redemptoris Mater. And that Marian hymn causes him to go away.
And finally, for the last part of this video, I'd like to share with you something that Father Ripperger only said briefly, but I think it's something rather interesting to share with all of you. To give you a little background, let me share you what I found when I searched about this in Google. In the following clip, Father Ripperger said something about Incubus, which is basically a demon someone has sex with. And when I searched this on Google, I found another term as well. Let me show you, succubus and incubus. An incubus is a demon in male form in folklore that seeks to have sexual intercourse with sleeping women, while the corresponding spirit in female form is called a succubus. Did you know that in medieval Europe, union with an incubus was supposed by some to result in the birth of witches, demons, and deformed human offspring? Legendary magician Merlin was said to have been fathered by an incubus. Let's hear what Father Ripperger has to say about it, though.
In Hollywood and in the music industry, they are openly talking about what's called an incubus. that they have an incubus, which is basically a demon they have sex with. They're openly talking about it. And many of these women are actually possessed. You see it by their psychological patterns, because the psychological patterns are very distinct between possession, diabolic influence, and things like psychosis and things of that sort. They have very distinct. Even though to the untrained eye they look the same, they're very distinct.
Anyway, that is all for this video. Again, my sincerest apology for taking too much of your time, but I really do hope you've learned something new from this video. As Father Ripperger said in one of his lectures before, when it comes to our own spiritual battles, Christ is standing behind us as long as we are standing with him. So what does that mean? Do you remember that Christ actually said to the apostles, when they came back, they said to Jesus they were all joyful, and they said that even the demons obeyed us in Christ's name. But then Jesus said to them, count not the fact that the demons were subject to you. Don't be glad for that reason. Be glad rather that your names are written in heaven. What does that mean? Well, it means that the more intense the person's spiritual warfare is in their life, it's actually a greater sign of predestination if they cooperate with Christ through that process. Again, my sincerest thanks to all of you, and if there are any particular subject you would like me to cover, please do let me know in the comments down below. Until then, God bless you, and thank you so much once again.